Imagine stepping back in time. San Francisco, 1945.
Mm-hmm.
The world is just reeling from this unbelievable conflict twice in a generation for many people.
A devastating time. And you had representatives gathering there, right, in San Francisco.
Exactly, with this, well, monumental goal.
It's a moment that feels heavy with history, but also, hope. A decision that things had to change.
Absolutely. And their answer wasn't just talk, it was a plan, a document. The foundation for so much since.
That's what we're digging into today, isn't it?
Yes. We're doing a deep dive into the Charter of the United Nations, signed right there in San Francisco, 1945, along with the Statute of the International Court of Justice.
Okay. And it's a dense text, not exactly light reading.
No, definitely not. But
Yeah.
understanding it, it's like having the blueprint for the international system we live in.
Right. So our mission basically is to unpack it, look at the core aims, the structure they set up,
Yeah.
and figure out why it still matters so much.
Precisely. It lays out these huge principles for cooperation, for peace. What did they actually agree on back then? And what does it mean for you today? Let's dive in.
Okay, where do we start? I think you have to start with the preamble, that powerful opening.
We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined. It grabs you right away.
It does.
But
To save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. That phrase, twice in our lifetime, wow.
It just lands, doesn't it? The sheer weight of that experience, that was the immediate catalyst.
But it wasn't only about stopping war, was it?
No, not at all. The preamble paints a much bigger picture. It talks about reaffirming fundamental human rights.
The dignity and worth of every person.
Equal rights for men and women and for nations large and small.
And they also wanted justice, respect for international law, social progress, better living standards.
Right. So preventing war was step one, maybe the most urgent step, but building a more just, more decent world was right there alongside it. And the preamble even lists how they plan to do it.
Yeah, things like practicing tolerance, living peacefully like good neighbors, using their combined strength for security.
Making sure armed force is only used in the common interest, and using international mechanisms for, well, progress.
It's a really holistic vision right from the start.
So from that big vision, we move into Chapter 1, the purposes and principles. Article 1 is like the UN's job description.
First job, maintain international peace and security. That means collective action against threats, sure, but also peaceful dispute settlement.
Then developing friendly relations between nations, and crucially, based on equal rights and self-determination.
That self-determination point was, and still is, huge.
Third purpose, international cooperation. Solving those big global problems, economic, social, cultural, humanitarian, and promoting human rights.
It broadens the scope way beyond just stopping fights.
And fourth, the UN itself acting as a center, a place to harmonize actions to achieve these goals.
Okay, so those are the purposes. What about the principles in Article 2, the ground rules?
Rule number 1, and it sounds simple, but it's fundamental. The sovereign equality of all members. Big or small, you're equal under the Charter.
Which leads to the next point. Members have to fulfill their charter obligations in good faith. You signed up, you stick to it.
And they have to settle disputes peacefully without endangering peace, security, or justice.
Then comes the big one, Article 2, Paragraph 4.
Ah, yes. Refraining from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, that's a cornerstone.
Absolutely, a core prohibition.
Right.
Members also have to help the UN when it acts and not help states the UN is acting against.
And the UN is even supposed to try and ensure non-members follow these principles, at least for peace and security reasons.
Which is interesting, extending the influence beyond the membership.
Then there's Article 2, Paragraph 7, non-intervention. Generally, the UN stays out of a state's domestic affairs.
Generally. But there's that crucial exception.
Right. This principle doesn't stop the Security Council from taking enforcement action under Chapter 7. We'll definitely get back to that.
That's where a lot of the tension lies, isn't it? Sovereignty versus intervention.
For sure. Okay, so who gets to be member? Chapter 2 lays that out.
The original members were those at the San Francisco Conference or who'd signed the earlier declaration by United Nations and then signed and ratified the charter itself.
And for states joining later, Article 4 has the checklist.
You need to be peace-loving, accept the charter obligations, and be judged able and willing to carry them out.
And the process.
The General Assembly makes the final decision, but only on the recommendation of the Security Council.
So the Security Council, especially the permanent members, have a say right from the start, a gatekeeper role.
Exactly. And the Charter does mention suspension or even expulsion for members who persistently violate the principles, though that's very rare.
Okay, so we have the goals, the rules, the members. How does it actually work? The machinery. Chapter 3, organs.
6 principal organs are listed.
General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat.
And it also mentions that subsidiary organs can be created as needed.
And I like Article 8 right at the beginning of this section. It says men and women are equally eligible to participate in any role.
A statement of principle embedded early on. Good point.
So let's look at the General Assembly first. Chapter 4. This is the big talking shop, right? The global forum.
Essentially, yes. Article 9 says it's made up of all UN members. Every country gets a seat.
And Article 18 clarifies each member has one vote.
Its powers are really broad. Article 10 says it can discuss any question or matter within the Charter's scope. Any issue, basically.
It discusses principles for peace and security, disarmament. Article 11 pushes for developing international law, cooperation on human rights, economic issues, social issues. Article 13 is huge.
It really covers a vast range. But there's a limit. Article 12.
Limitation. It generally can't make recommendations on a dispute if the Security Council is already actively handling it.
Right. The Security Council has the lead on active peace and security threats. The GA shouldn't interfere directly at that moment.
But the GA isn't powerless. It gets reports from the SC and other organs, and Article 17 is critical.
The power of the purse.
Yeah, exactly. The GA considers and approves the UN's budget and decides how much each member contributes. That's real influence.
And voting isn't always simple majority. Article 18 says important questions need a 2/3 majority of those present and voting.
What counts as important? Recommendations on peace and security, electing non-permanent Security Council members, admitting new members, budget
The
questions.
big stuff. Other things are simple majority.
And here's something maybe not everyone knows from Article 19. If a member gets too far behind on paying its dues 2 full years behind,
They can lose their vote in the General Assembly.
right, unless the GA decides the failure to pay is due to circumstances beyond their control. Money matters.
So the GA is the big forum. But the Security Council, Chapter 5, that's different. That's the sharp end for peace and security.
Article 23 sets out the members. 15 now, but originally 11. 5 are permanent. China, France, the USSR, now Russia, the UK, and the US.
The P5. And 10 non-permanent members, elected by the GA for 2-year terms.
Now, Article 24. This is absolutely key. Members give the Security Council primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security.
And they agree that the Council acts on their behalf when doing this.
Then Article 25 seals the deal. Members agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council.
That's what makes Security Council resolutions legally binding, unlike most GA resolutions, which are recommendations. Big difference.
Huge difference. And Article 27, the voting mechanism.
Okay. Each of the 15 members gets 1 vote. Procedural stuff needs 9 votes. Simple enough. But for all other matters, the substantive decisions, the binding ones, you still need 9 votes, including the concurring votes of the permanent members,
The veto.
the veto. Any one of the P5 says no to a substantive resolution, and it fails, even if the other 14 wrote yes.
It's the reality of power politics in 1945 written right into the Charter.
Though, as you mentioned, there's a small caveat. If a state is party to a dispute being discussed under Chapter 6, the peaceful settlement part, it has to abstain from voting on decisions related to that specific settlement process.
Right, a slight check. So how does the Council actually try to settle things peacefully? That's Chapter 6.
Article 33 is the foundation here. If you have a dispute that could threaten peace, you, the parties involved, must first try to sort it out yourselves.
How? Negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, going to court, using regional groups, whatever peaceful means you choose.
The Security Council's initial role is often just to formally call on the parties to do exactly that. Use Article 33 methods.
The Council can also investigate disputes itself, Article 34, to see how serious they are.
And it can recommend procedures or methods for adjustment, Article 36, like suggesting they take a legal dispute to the ICJ.
But what if they try and fail? Article 37.
If the parties can't settle it using those Article 33 means, they shall refer it to the Security Council. It becomes the council's problem then.
And the council decides whether to just recommend procedures again, or maybe even recommend actual terms for a settlement.
Okay, so that's the peaceful route. But what if that doesn't work? Or if there's outright aggression?
That takes us to Chapter 7. This is the enforcement chapter. Action regarding threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, acts of aggression.
This is where the council gets its enforcement powers. Article 39 is the gateway.
The council first has to determine that such a threat, breach, or act of aggression actually exists. That determination is crucial.
Once it makes that call, it decides what measures to take. It might start with Article 40, provisional measures.
Like calling for a ceasefire, to stop things getting worse while they figure out the next step.
Exactly. Then, Article 41 allows for measures not involving armed force. Sanctions, basically.
Cutting off economic relations, rail, sea, air, postal, radio communications, severing diplomatic ties. The council can call on members to apply these.
But if the council thinks those Article 41 measures would be inadequate, or they've tried them and they haven't worked.
Then comes Article 42, the big one. The council can authorize action by air, sea, or land forces as needed to maintain or restore peace and security.
This is the legal basis for UN-authorized military interventions, blockades, and other operations using member states' forces.
Article 43 envisioned members making forces available to the council through special agreements.
Which never really happened in the way they originally planned, with a standing UN army. Instead, it's more coalitions of the willing authorized by the council.
Now, amidst all this council power, there's Article 51, hugely important.
The inherent right of self-defense. It states clearly that nothing in the Charter takes away a state's right to defend itself individually or collectively if an armed attack occurs.
But there's a condition.
Right. This right exists until the Security Council has taken the measures needed to maintain peace and security. And any state acting in self-defense must report its actions to the Council immediately.
So it's a right, but it's meant to be temporary and linked back to the council's authority.
And the tension between collective security under Chapter 7 and self-defense under Article 51, well, that's generated endless debate and shaped countless crises.
Definitely. Okay, moving on slightly. Chapter 8 acknowledges regional arrangements.
Like the African Union or the Organization of American States, the Charter encourages using these regional bodies first to settle local disputes peacefully.
But Article 53 is key here. These regional groups cannot take enforcement action without Security Council authorization.
The SE keeps control over the use of force, with a minor exception for outdated clauses about former enemy states from WWII.
So we've covered the security architecture, but remember the broader goals. Chapter 9 gets into international economic and social cooperation.
Article 55 lists the aims: higher living standards, full employment, progress in economic and social fields, solving health problems, promoting human rights for all.
It's incredibly broad.
Yeah.
And Article 56 is the pledge. Members commit to take joint and separate action with the UN to make this happen.
And this is where the specialized agencies come in. Article 57. Think WHO, UNESCO, ILO, the World Bank.
Independent organizations working on specific global issues brought into a relationship with the UN system.
And Chapter X sets up the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, to coordinate a lot of this work.
ECOSOC initiates studies, makes recommendations on all those Article 55 areas, tries to coordinate the specialized agencies.
And importantly, Article 71 allows ECOSOC to consult with non-governmental organizations, NGOs. That was quite progressive for 1945.
Giving civil society a route into the system. Then there are chapters on territories. Chapter 11 is the declaration regarding non-self-governing territories.
Article 73 establishes this idea of a sacred trust for colonial powers administering territories that weren't yet self-governing, a duty to promote well-being and develop self-government.
Which led into Chapter 12, the international trusteeship system, a more formal system for territories placed under UN oversight, aiming for self-government or independence.
And Chapter 13 created the Trusteeship Council to oversee this system. Its work is largely done now, as most trust territories achieved independence.
Right. Now, who runs the UN day to day? Chapter 15, the Secretariat.
Headed by the Secretary General, the UN's Chief Administrative Officer, appointed by the General Assembly on the Security Council's recommendation, Article 97.
But the SG isn't just a manager. Article 99 gives them a potentially powerful political tool.
They can bring any matter which, in their opinion, might threaten international peace and security to the attention of the Security Council.
That allows the SG to be proactive, to raise alarms.
And the staff. Article 100 says they're international officials responsible only to the UN, not their home governments.
Article 101 emphasizes efficiency, competence, integrity, and recruiting on a wide geographical basis, building an international civil service.
Okay, so that's the political and administrative side. What about the legal pillar? Chapter 14, the International Court of Justice?
The ICJ, Article 92 of the Charter, calls it the principal judicial organ of the UN. It operates according to its statute, which is annexed to the Charter.
And Article 93 says all UN members are automatically parties to the ICJ statute. You join the UN, you join the court system.
The statute itself details how the court works. 15 independent judges.
Elected by the GA and the Security Council, voting separately. They look for high moral character, legal qualifications, and representation of the world's main legal systems.
Based in The Hague. Now it's competence who can bring cases.
This is crucial. Article 34 of the statute. Only states may be parties in cases before the court, not individuals, not companies, not even other international organizations in contentious cases.
So it settles disputes between states and its jurisdiction.
It hears cases that states agreed to submit to it, maybe through a special agreement or based on clauses in treaties. Article 36 statute.
And states can also make a declaration accepting the court's jurisdiction as compulsory for certain types of legal disputes with other states that have made similar declarations. The optional clause.
Right. What law does it apply? Article 38 of the statute lists the sources: international treaties, international custom, general principles of law recognized by civilized nations, and, as secondary sources, judicial decisions and academic writings.
And the effect of its judgments. This is important too, Article 59 of the statute.
It states that the court's decision has binding force only between the parties involved, and only for that specific case.
So, unlike many domestic systems, ICJ judgments don't create binding precedent for everyone. They're very influential, of course, in shaping international law, but technically only binding on the states in that particular dispute.
Exactly. The court can also issue advisory opinions on legal questions if asked by authorized UN bodies, like the General Assembly or Security Council, Article 96 Charter, Article 65 Statute.
Okay, almost there. Just a few miscellaneous points in Chapter 16 that are quite significant.
Article 102. Transparency. Every treaty or international agreement made by a UN member has to be registered with the Secretariat and published.
And if it's not registered,
You can't invoke that treaty before any UN organ, including the ICJ. A strong incentive to register.
and then Article 103, this one feels like a heavyweight.
It really is. It says that if a member's obligations under the UN Charter conflict with obligations under any other international agreement,
Their charter obligations prevail.
yes, it essentially establishes the Charter's supremacy over other treaties for UN members.
Wow. Okay, Chapters 7 and 8 deal with some transitional things and, critically, amendments. How do you change this thing?
Article 108 says amendments need a two-thirds vote in the General Assembly, and they have to be ratified by two-thirds of the UN members, including all 5 permanent members of the Security Council.
There it is again. The P5 veto extends even to changing the charter itself. Makes fundamental reform very difficult.
Extremely difficult. And finally, Chapter 9.8 covers ratification and entry into force. Signed June 26, 1945, in San Francisco. Came into force once the P5 and a majority of others ratified. Article 111 notes the equally authentic texts in Chinese, French, Russian, English, and Spanish.
So, when you step back and look at the whole thing, born from the ashes of war, it's just breathtaking in its scope.
It really is. Preventing war through collective security, peaceful settlement, but also this huge ambition to build a better world, economic progress, social justice, human rights, all grounded in international law with a court.
It's set up this complex machine, the GA debating, the SC acting on security, ECOSOC coordinating development, the ICJ handling state disputes. It's the framework we still operate within.
Constantly being tested, debated, pushed, pulled. But it's the framework.
And it's fascinating how it grapples with those inherent tensions, isn't it? Sovereign equality versus collective action.
Security Council power versus the right of self-defense. Non-intervention versus the responsibility to act under Chapter 7.
These aren't abstract ideas. They play out in real-world crises all the time.
Which leads to a really interesting final thought, perhaps. The Charter gives that primary responsibility for peace and security to the Security Council, heavily influenced by the P5. But it also upholds sovereign equality and the right of self-defense for all states.
So the question is, how has that fundamental tension baked into the Charter from day one actually shaped global events? How has it impacted the UN's ability to act and the course of international relations over nearly 80 years?
That's something worth reflecting on, I think. How does that built-in tension continue to influence the world we see today?
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the UN Charter and the Statute of the ICJ.